Sania Lewis stepped off the worn bus and onto the cracked pavement of East Side Atlanta, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The air smelled like fried chicken and cut grass, a scent she hadn't realized she missed until now. Rows of aging houses leaned against each other, their paint chipped and their porches sagging under the weight of time. This was the street where she had learned to ride a bike, where her grandmother had sat every evening waving at every neighbor like family. Now, it felt smaller, rougher, but somehow still home. Wearing faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt, tucked neatly into her waistband, Sana blended easily into the working-class neighborhood. Only the way she carried herself, head high, steps firm, back straight, hinted at a lifetime of discipline she hadn't left behind with her Air Force uniform. She crossed the street toward the old house, keys jingling quietly in her pocket. Her plan was simple: renovate it, turn it into a safe place for the neighborhood kids who deserved better than what the city offered. She hadn't even made it up the front steps when the shrill sound of tires scraping against asphalt made her glance over her shoulder. A patrol car slowed to a crawl beside the curb, its presence too deliberate to ignore. Sana kept walking, willing herself to focus on the lock. Metal clicked as she turned the key, but before the door swung open, a sharp voice called out behind her. "Hey, you live here?" She turned, resting her palm lightly against the door frame. Officer Travis Monroe stood there, sunglasses masking his eyes, one hand hovering near his duty belt. His tone carried the easy suspicion that assumed guilt without needing evidence. "I do," Sana said evenly. "You got proof of that?" Sania studied him, the way his chest puffed out slightly, the subtle lift of his chin. A man who thought the badge made him untouchable. She pulled a set of keys from her pocket and held them up between two fingers, letting them jingle lightly. "Keys aren't enough," Monroe said, stepping closer. Inside, her heart stayed steady, trained by years in high-tension zones. Kandahar had taught her patience. Mogadishu had taught her how dangerous arrogance could be. "I don't owe you anything," she said calmly, keeping her voice low so the rising group of onlookers across the street wouldn't hear more than necessary. Monroe's mouth tightened. He didn't like that she hadn't cowered, hadn't scrambled to explain herself. He demanded identification, his voice sharper now, cutting through the thick summer air. Sana obliged slowly, pulling a slim leather wallet from her back pocket and flipping it open to reveal her Air Force ID, the silence. Stretched awkwardly as Monroe stared at it, his thumb brushing the edge as if searching for flaws. "Air Force, huh?" he said finally, skepticism dripping from every syllable. Sana gave a small nod, saying nothing. She knew his type. They didn't believe respect could belong to a black woman standing firm on her own porch. "You got any proof you live here?" he asked again, ignoring the ID in his hand. "My name's on the deed," she said, voice even, gaze steady. "You're welcome to look it up." Monroe shifted his weight, caught between his growing anger and the realization he was losing the upper hand. Behind him, a teenage boy lifted his phone, beginning to record. Others followed. Sana caught the movement in her periphery, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. "You causing problems?" Monroe asked, louder this time, almost hoping to provoke a scene. "No, officer," she said smoothly. "Are you?" The corners of his mouth twitched downward. A wrong move, a sharp word, and he'd twist the situation into whatever narrative he needed. But Sana refused to offer him that power. "Stay right here," Monroe muttered, stepping back toward his patrol car, fumbling for his radio. Sana remained by the door, back straight, eyes forward, a quiet pillar in the gathering storm. Inside her chest, a different kind of battle brewed, The IV kind fought without weapons, without armor, just unbreakable spirit. She wasn't just standing on her grandmother's porch. She was standing on every promise she had made to herself, every hard-earned right her ancestors had fought for, and she wasn't about to give an inch. Not today. The patrol car's door slammed hard enough to make a few heads turn. Officer Monroe stomped back toward her, radio crackling faintly at his hip. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched like he was fighting a losing battle inside his own mind. Sana didn't move. Her fingers lightly brushed the edge of the door frame, steady and unhurried. She could feel the shift in the air, an invisible ripple of something sour and heavy, like the way the sky changed just before a storm. "Step away from the door," Monroe barked, loud enough for half the block to hear. "Put your hands where I can see them." Across the street, more people emerged from doorways and shop fronts. Phones lifted higher. Whispers floated on the humid breeze. Sana stayed exactly where she was, her hands relaxed at her sides. "I haven't broken any law," she said, her voice clear but calm. "I'm not moving." The officer's fingers twitched, hovering dangerously close to the baton strapped at his belt. His pride had been pricked, and in front of an audience, no less. That made him unpredictable. "You're obstructing an investigation," Monroe snapped, voice pitching higher. "What investigation?" she asked, her tone a scalpel cutting through his empty threats. "You stopped me without cause." Someone in the crowd muttered agreement. The teenager's recording snickered quietly, sensing the imbalance shifting. Monroe's face darkened. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing for her wrist. His grip was rough, clumsy, driven by frustration rather than training. Bad decision. In a fluid motion that barely looked like effort, Sana pivoted her body, slipping out of his grasp. She sidestepped neatly, leaving him grasping at air like a man chasing shadows. The onlookers gasped, some chuckling under their breath. Monroe stumbled, but caught himself, fury flashing across his face. He reached again, more desperate this time, but Sana's body moved with instinct, not hesitation. A slight shift of her shoulders, a precise turn of her hip, and she redirected his momentum effortlessly, forcing him a step backward without even touching him forcefully. "You're resisting arrest!" Monroe shouted, his voice cracking. "For what charge?" Sana countered, her breathing even, her eyes sharp. The crowd grew louder now, voices blending into a low, buzzing current. A woman leaned out of a nearby window, phone aimed squarely at the unfolding scene. A man by the corner store shook his head in disgust. "She ain't done nothin', man," someone called out. Monroe's nostrils flared. He was drowning, and he knew it. His hand shot to his radio. "Requesting backup. Code 2, suspect refusing to comply." The words tumbled out too fast, too sloppily, the voice of a man trying to regain power slipping through his fingers. He dropped the radio back to his belt and squared up to her again, closer this time, close enough for Sana to smell the coffee and frustration on his breath. "Turn around. Now," he hissed, eyes gleaming with pure humiliation. Sana didn't blink. She had stared down bigger threats in darker corners of the world. She wasn't about to flinch for a man whose authority cracked the moment it was questioned. "I suggest you think carefully," she said, her voice low but firm. "Your next move decides how this ends." Monroe's hands curled into fists. He lunged, reaching for his handcuffs, his posture reckless. The world seemed to slow around Sana. Her muscles responded with precise discipline. A step forward, a twist of her arm, a redirection of his momentum that left him sprawling against the door of his own cruiser. Phones captured every humiliating second. Gasps, laughter, and shouted commentary filled the street. "Man, she just dusted you," someone howled. Monroe scrambled upright, his face red, breathing heavy, but the damage was done. Pride shattered, reputation slipping through his hands like sand. From down the block, the wail of a second patrol car siren pierced the air. Backup was coming, but not for Sana. Not in the way Monroe had hoped. He looked at her, hatred and confusion swirling in his eyes, and, for the first time, real fear, too. She hadn't laid a hand on him beyond defending herself, but she had stripped him of the thing he valued most: control. Standing there, steady as a stone, Sana Lewis had turned his weapon of authority into a paper shield, and he knew it. The second patrol car skidded to a halt. Uniformed officers spilled out, but the first one to approach wasn't another hothead with something to prove. Captain Roland Hayes strode forward, his sharp gaze immediately assessing the scene, the crowd, the phones, and the defeated stance of Monroe. The captain's voice cut clean through the noise, steady and commanding. "What's going on here?" Monroe opened his mouth to answer, but hesitated, the words choking in his throat. He glanced once at the swirling crowd, the dozens of phones capturing every twitch, every stutter. Sana remained silent, giving him the IB space to either hang himself or come clean. The captain's eyes narrowed, sensing the lie before it even arrived. And in that split second, Officer Travis Monroe realized he wasn't walking away from this as the hero he'd convinced himself. He was, not today. Captain Hayes didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Authority dripped from his every word, the kind that came from years of commanding respect rather than demanding it. Officer Monroe shifted uncomfortably under the weight of those piercing eyes. The crowd watched in silence, their phones still recording, their expressions a mixture of anger, curiosity, and satisfaction. Sana stood still near the porch, arms at her sides, every muscle relaxed but ready. She had been in situations far more dangerous than this, but somehow this confrontation on a cracked sidewalk in her own country felt heavier than the firefights overseas. Hayes stepped between them, glancing first at Sana, then at Monroe. His gaze lingered on the younger officer's disheveled stance, reading the situation without needing a single word from either side. "Explain," Hayes said, voice even but edged with warning. Monroe fumbled for a story, stringing together half-truths about non-compliance, aggressive behavior, and resisting arrest. His words spilled out awkwardly, riddled with holes large enough for anyone to see through. The captain didn't interrupt. He let Monroe dig himself deeper, then turned to Sana, offering her a space to speak without force, without pressure. She lifted her chin slightly. "I unlocked my own house," she said calmly. "He approached without cause, demanded proof, ignored my ID, and tried to detain me without explanation." Several heads in the crowd nodded. A murmur rolled through the gathering, like a slow wave. They had seen it all, and their recordings would soon travel faster than any official report. Hayes held Monroe's gaze for a long moment, disappointment clear on his face. Then, quietly but firmly, he extended his hand toward the shaken officer. "Badge and weapon," he said. Monroe's eyes widened. For a second, he looked like he might argue, but the glint in the captain's eyes left no room for negotiation. Reluctantly, Monroe unhooked his badge, then his holstered sidearm, placing both into Hayes's outstretched hand with trembling fingers. The crowd erupted in quiet gasps. The sound of justice, rare and raw, hung heavily in the humid air. Hayes turned slightly toward Sana, his posture shifting from cold command to one of measured respect. "Ma'am," he said, "do you wish to press charges?" Sana looked past him, her gaze sweeping across the faces gathered there, the old men leaning against the fence, the young mothers clutching toddlers, the teenagers still filming. She thought about the weight of what it meant to fight back, not just for herself, but for all of them. She inhaled deeply, feeling the heavy pull of anger, pride, and weariness inside her chest. "No," she said finally, her voice steady. "I didn't come back here to destroy anyone. I just came to build something better." For a moment, the street was completely silent, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Hayes nodded once, sharply, understanding more than her words alone conveyed. "You have my respect, Captain Lewis," he said. Recognition flickered through the crowd, a low hum of awe spreading as her title sank in. She hadn't needed to announce her history. She had lived it, and it spoke louder than anything she could have said. Hayes turned back to Monroe. "You're suspended pending investigation. Internal Affairs will be in contact. You are dismissed." Monroe didn't argue. He didn't even lift his head. He just trudged back to his patrol car under the watchful eyes of a neighborhood that would never forget how easily power had crumbled when faced with truth. Sana watched him go, not with triumph, but with a weary kind of sadness. She didn't celebrate his fall. She mourned the sickness that made it inevitable. As the second patrol car pulled away, the gathering slowly began to break apart. Neighbors nodded at her, some offering small smiles of gratitude. The woman who had filmed most of it gave her a puey, small thumbs up before disappearing into the crowd. Sana turned back toward the house, the creaky porch groaning softly under her boots. She leaned against the railing, letting the moment settle inside her bones. Her grandmother's house, once a refuge of laughter and safety, would soon be filled with children again, running, shouting, dreaming. No uniform, no badge, no threat could take that away from her. As the late sun dipped behind the Atlanta skyline, casting long, forgiving shadows over the neighborhood, Sana Lewis stood firm, in a world that still asked her to prove her worth. At every turn, she had answered not with fists, not with fury, but with unshakable resolve. Some battles, she knew, weren't fought to destroy. They were fought to heal, and sometimes winning wasn't about walking away victorious. It was about standing your ground and refusing to disappear.